Hello, I'm Sim Sitkin. I'm a professor at Duke University, and my area of research has to do with trust and distrust in organizations and society, leadership, and a number of other related issues like exercising control in organizations, encouraging people to act courageously, and so forth. Today, what I'm going to be talking with you about is the challenge of polarization in our societies and how we can draw on research on distrust and trust to look at ways that we can effectively address this challenge of polarization. As I'm speaking, I'll talk for about 20 minutes and then we'll leave 10 minutes for questions at the end. Please post your questions and comments to the comments tab, and we'll address those a little bit later. So let me start by talking about polarization a little bit. It's become really widely recognized that polarization is a serious societal problem in the United States and actually in many parts of the world. Here are a few examples of recent articles or other publications ranging from research centers to media to consulting firms all looking at this issue. So if we think about how to handle polarization, this is a recent article published by David Bursoff, who is the research director for the Edelman Trust Institute, on how to overcome political polarization. He identified several issues that were critical. That when there is polarization, it is related to people perceiving that there are differences on the issues at hand, that it becomes very political, and that it evolves into what's referred to as affective polarization, which means I don't just disagree with you, but I actually now don't like you and I don't trust you. Why is that? Partly it's a lack of shared identity. We begin to generalize this to distrust societal institutions. But there are two other key things, actually three other key things that he identified that we'll explore more fully. One is, if you look at the bottom of this slide, he identified that there are three very distinct mindsets with respect to polarization. One group doesn't think we're very divided at all and are much more open to remedies of various kinds. The second group does believe we're divided, but they're not entrenched in a mindset of polarization. Whereas the third group is divided and entrenched. They're very difficult to move. And part of the issue then is, how do you address it so you can move those who aren't as entrenched and maybe take some of those who are entrenched? They'll still see the division, but they won't be as rigid about their response. One of the key things he found that was critical is the next to last bullet on the right, pessimism. That it's not just believing that we have differences and big differences, but if people are pessimistic about the ability to overcome those differences, that's what leads to this affective polarization. The last thing that he identified that we'll come back to as well is the important role of employers. That employers are the most trusted and as a result are the most able to intervene and begin to rectify some of the polarization problems. Here's another example of how important this is. The Society for Human Resource Management, also known as SHRM, has really identified, and here are pictures of two books they've come out with recently, one by Alex Alonso, their research director, and the other by Shauna Corden. What they have identified is that within the workplace, there is major concern about polarization infecting the workplace, and that organizations really need to address it. So what do you need to do to address polarization? One is you've got to address the distrust that is associated with it. Second, which very few people have looked at, is there is a generalized trust that develops in your in-group. So it's not only that you have extreme distrust of the out-group, but you have a very strong generalized trust in your in-group. You have to address both of those in order to move to the third step here and begin to build trust, which is what you want to do. Now, let's start with distrust. What are the determinants of distrust? There are two big things. One is I perceive that you and I do not share the same values. I even go further, and I believe we have incompatible worldviews. We just do not see things the same way. Now, that's what causes it. What are the characteristics of distrust? It's pervasive. If I distrust you, I have now written you off. It's not about I don't trust you on this issue, but I do on that. It's now pervasive. You are distrusted across the board. The other characteristic of it is whenever there is information that pops up, you ignore the positive information because you just say either they're trying to trick me or I don't believe the information. So the idea is there is this stable negative perception, and it is almost immune to countervailing information. Now, there's a process. We've done some research on this. I won't go into the details about the characteristics of distrust and how it emerges and gets reinforced. The key here is you can see perceived value incongruence is what causes the distrust. But what it makes it stick is we start a negative cycle of interaction with each other. I tend to bond with my in-group and push you away from it. Whenever something happens, even positive things, I'm going to make negative attributions. As I mentioned before, I may say, oh, you're just trying to trick me, or you're spinning the information and what you're telling me is not true. That in turn reinforces the distrust. It enhances my sense that we have incongruent values. And then the cycle just continues and gets worse and worse and worse. Now, if we compare distrust with generalized trust, it's striking how many similarities there are, but they're just flip valence. So for distrust, I mentioned perceived value incongruence. For generalized trust, I believe we have absolutely the same values. Distrust, I think we have an incompatible worldview. With generalized trust, I think we see things the same way. In distrust, I believe you don't respect me or care about my welfare, whereas with generalized trust, I believe that you do. With distrust, I think you fundamentally do not understand me, whereas in generalized trust, I really do believe you understand me. You can think of situations in our world today, whether they're political or non-political, where people will exhibit all of these attributes of distrust to the outgroup, to the other side of the polarization, and all of the attributes of generalized trust to the in-group who are on their same side of polarization. So these are really literally polar opposites. And the question is, you've got to address both of these, both the generalized trust with the in-group and the distrust with the out-group, in order to begin to address the polarization issue. Now, we have an approach that we're taking now, my work with Chris Long, looking at how to integrate a model of generalized trust, distrust, and a trust continuum. And the question is, so if you look at this picture, what it shows is to get to distrust or to get to generalized trust, it's not easy. You have to get over a hump. But once you're in it, you're like in a valley, and it's very hard to get out of it. What you really want people to do in a democratic society and a healthy organization is be located along that trust continuum that's in the middle, where basically I may have high trust in you, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to scrutinize what you tell me and reflect on it. And I may not trust you with everything. I may know you're going to really be trustworthy in delivering the best work you can, but I may not trust the details of your statistical analysis, let's say. On the trust continuum, people can distinguish different issues. Some may be high trust, low trust with a person, but they're not writing the person off entirely. They write them off entirely when they're in the distrust bucket, and they trust them even if they're doing something terrible in the generalized trust bucket. Neither of those keep high levels of scrutiny. Now, the point that I'm making is, if you look at these arrows, both distrust and generalized trust are really extreme. They're dysfunctional, and they represent a fixed level of uncertainty. I have no uncertainty because I know I can't trust you about anything, or I know I can trust you about everything. Whereas in the middle, it's functional because it's got more of a continuum and people are still exercising their judgment. And I might trust you to handle my finances, but not trust you to take care of my children or handle something else. So in the middle, people remain discerning. In the middle, you're not polarized. When you're at the two extremes, you are. What you want to be able to do is cut through that hump and get back to the trust continuum. So you're now in a valley in generalized trust or distrust. To get to trust, you can't climb over that mountain to get to the trust continuum. You have to cut through it. And the question is, what are the things that research has shown us that help us cut through? And so here, using distrust as an example, here are the things that make distrust harder to overcome. One is, when you distrust, you avoid interaction with the other party. You selectively focus on the negatives that reinforce your preconceptions. It really intensifies how negative you are with the other party, and you won't cooperate with them even if what they're offering you is easy or positive. The other thing, the last thing that happens here is, it's not even just what's referred to as a tit for tat strategy. It's, you actually overmatch. If you say something negative to me, I'm going to say something nastier and more negative to you when we're in the distrust category. The ameliorators are highlighting that we actually may disagree about tactics, but we have the same underlying goals and values. Don't deny that we have differences, but focus on what is common. Convey that we really understand each other and that we respect each other. So I can say, I disagree with how you've analyzed a situation, but I can respect how you got there, and I can convey to you that I truly understand the way you thought about it. Also, convey that I really care about your welfare. I don't have to agree with you to think that good things should happen to you. The last piece of this is, find one area where you can establish trust and then build on it. Remember, distrust has a monolithic wall that's now been built. I treat you as just all bad. If you can create a crack in that wall and have something that is positive, that moves you over into the trust continuum. You may be at the bottom of it, but it means you can adjust as new information comes in. Now, in building trust, there's a longer record of research on this. The most well-known model says there are three things you need to do to build trust. Demonstrate that you're capable, you have ability, that you're benevolent, that you care about the welfare of the other party, and that you will act with integrity. Those have been found in many, many research studies to help you build trust. If you've addressed distrust, you can get into the trust building mode. If you haven't addressed distrust, none of these are going to matter. If I think you're really my enemy, I don't want you to have higher levels of ability. I don't want you to have integrity and always be trying to do something bad to me. Now, in some of my more recent research, we found some other factors that help build trust. One is, the more interdependent we are, the more we're going to interact. The more we interact, the more opportunities there are to demonstrate my trustworthiness. As I mentioned before, identifying that we have shared values even if we disagree about tactics. Identifying that we have a shared sense of identity. So in the political arena, when people emphasize, say in the United States, we're all Americans and we care about liberty and we care about freedom, that's identifying a shared identity, even if we disagree about specific policies. The last thing is, go out of your way to interact in a cooperative way and to engage the other in cooperative interaction. The last piece that I want to highlight is, in some of our more recent research with my colleague Alan Lind, We built on the notion of benevolence and concern and respect, which I've already mentioned. But there are two other things that are really important. Making sure you really believe I understand you in your eyes, from your perspective, not just through mine, that I truly understand you, and then I can communicate about where I might disagree. And then finally, that whether or not I agree with you, I will treat you fairly. Now, cutting through the barrier, taking off either the rose-colored glasses of generalized trust or what one person referred to as the blood-colored glasses of distrust, you want to encourage people to have a more balanced, accurate, and differentiated perception of each other. I've already mentioned encourage interaction. Do not attack the other person's beliefs or positions, but ask for explanations and raise the non-conforming information that might challenge some of those. As I said, emphasize common values and demonstrate that you have those values. Then be explicit about your positive motivations across the boundaries between the polarized parties, and find very specific areas where their preconceptions of you, negative, or positive preconceptions of their cohort may not hold. Not everything, but very specific, narrow situations begins to open them up to be more discerning. Now, going back to David Bursoff and what he identified as ways to address polarization, he highlighted the important role of employers. That employers in the Edelman Trust research have been found to be the most trusted of all the institutional opportunities, and that can be a way of beginning to bridge the polarization. Do correct misunderstandings, help people build skills in dialogue rather than confrontation, structure in positive, narrowly defined opportunities for contact, and try to encourage and build into your institutions, if you're in a company or working with a government agency, are there structures and procedures and processes that can be built in that make them more responsive, and then explain how that is helping people and how it is inconsistent with their distrust. And then finally, recognize Bursoff's point that if there is not hope for reconciliation and collaboration, people give up and just wallow in the distrust and focus on their generalized trust comrades. What you want them to do is see that there's hope to bridge these divides. Now, I did that very quickly, and so I'm going to ask for questions and comments for a few minutes, and then we'll wrap up. Now, let me look. There's some comments in that have been posted. Let's see. So from Nick White, isn't this essentially steel manning the opposing argument? I'm not sure what steel manning means, but what you want to do if you want to bridge this divide is not get, and this may be what you mean, not get them to dig in their heels. If you attack them, they will dig in their heels. If you invite them to share their rationale, if you can show you really understand their rationale and you can respect it even if you disagree with it, before you raise anything about an opposing point of view, the research has shown that people are more open to hearing alternative points of view after you've shown you understand and respect. And before that, they won't. Let's see. Emotional intelligence is a great tool to navigate these challenges. Emotional intelligence is very helpful in general. What you want to be aware of is if they are sort of, putting up the walls and not willing to listen to you, don't just try to knock down the wall. Try to see if you can find a window or a door in the wall. But having that sense of when to back off, how to do it more gently, how to find ways to informally interact and find ways to build those little positive. The other thing, by the way, is just be interested and curious. Why does someone maybe you work with, maybe you respect them, have such a different view than yours. Be inquisitive, try to understand rather than to persuade. Now, Howard Monis asked the question of how do you engage in a dialogue if the other side doesn't believe in science? If they don't believe in science, you don't have to ground the argument in science if they're not going to listen to it. I mean, think of it as if you don't speak English and you only speak Swahili and I don't speak Swahili, then I can't convince you of anything if all I'm doing is speaking English. I've got to find a way of translating what I'm doing in a way that you can understand it and that I can understand what you're saying. That's why what I suggested was find a narrow niche where you can build that bridge and communicate with each other positively. Once you have one little niche, you can start building on it. But you can't do everything. And you're not going to, if they don't believe in science, you're not going to batter them into believing in science. But you can raise specific findings without referring to the scientific basis necessarily that are intuitive, that are easy to grasp. And that can be something then you can build on. Do I have any examples of companies that are doing this particularly well? Hi, Andrea. It's good. It's good to see that you're here. I don't offhand have companies that are doing it especially well, but a lot of companies are interested in it and are starting to have more and more initiatives like this. I remember a number of years ago, I was talking with the CEO of Red Hat, the software company that's now part of IBM, and one of the things they did was to create an open posting forum for everybody throughout the company, so people saw it was okay to raise really conflicting points of view, but there was a level of decorum and respect in how people interacted with each other. And I didn't observe it personally, but from my understanding, that really did raise the level where people having different perspectives were able to interact and work together effectively. At Duke, we've created something called the Dialogue Project as a way of trying to surface more of that, and we're working with a number of companies that are very interested in developing this. So Jamie Stoll has asked how to discern when to apply this wisdom versus when to maintain distance affectively. For example, when is it wise to increase trust with rivals? For example, a colleague who is appearing to undermine you. Well, one thing I would say, and it's so I've painted, I didn't have much time, so I've glossed over some of the nuances, but there's a tendency in a distrust setting, in a polarized setting, to avoid all interaction. I would not say completely open the kimono. You're not going to put, and if you think someone is undermining you, then it would be naive to say, I'm going to totally trust them, even if I don't think they're doing something that's trustworthy. What you want to do is to find one area where maybe you're not as vulnerable to them. So if they try to stab you in the back, it's not the end of the world. In another arena, it would be much more serious. Don't go to the arena where it's much more serious to start with. Build it very incrementally and create tests for each other. I've actually done this where I've said to another party, and it's not that they distrusted me specifically, but they had a bad history. So there was no reason for them to trust me when I came in. And so part of my suggestion was, let's find little tests for each other where you can see how I behave in this arena and that arena, where you're not at great risk, I'm not at great risk. And let's build that up. And then over time, see if we can walk up the steps to trust. That's one way to do it, where you can either do that by cutting a narrow channel through that hump, or, as I just mentioned, you create some steps up the hump and then hop over to trust at a slightly higher level. Let's see, a question from Janie S. As a leader entering a new organization, what would be the best approach and or how would you prioritize addressing distrust versus low trust with the organization? So our approach to leadership with when you're newly entering an organization or newly entering a relationship is you build on a lot of the things I talked about. Is you do need to have credibility with the other person. So they need to know you know what you're talking about. They have to help them get a sense of what your beliefs and your values are, and that you're really dedicated to what we're jointly trying to accomplish. Build on that to build trust. Ask questions. If you're new to the organization, the last thing you want to do is come in and say, well, in my last organization, we did this great. Let me just impose that on you. And you haven't even demonstrated you understand what they do and how they do it, that you respect it, even if you think changes are needed. So you want to establish credibility and trust through those mechanisms. And you also want to, first by learning from them, but then by also helping them see more clearly what is our context, how do we operate, what is our strategy. And they may fully understand it, but if you've been brought in new, they don't know that you understand it. How can I trust you if I don't think you know what you're talking about, you understand our situation, and you're going to relate to me in a way that I feel I can make myself vulnerable to you and rely on you. So those are the steps I would take to begin with. Now let's see. And by the way, one other thing that you asked there is distrust versus low trust. If there is a history of distrust, or sometimes even low trust, my recommendation would be acknowledge it. Acknowledge that there is a historical problem and say why and how you intend to do things differently, and or ask them why did that exist. So and tell them you want to know so you can know how to avoid the pitfalls that have occurred in the past, rather than just sweeping it under the rug. Let's see, we only have 2 more minutes, so let me take this last question. Yashraj, hi. So let's see. Any insights on how to deal with a situation where you are the link between 2 people who don't trust each other, but it's in your interest to make them trust each other? Okay, well, first of all, acknowledge, again, here, I think sometimes it's an acknowledgement. The research, by the way, on networks in organizations suggests that when you're a bridge between 2 people, you're in a node in that network where you have a lot of power, but that also means that they're vulnerable to you. They may worry whether you're actually advocating for them with the other or you using them. They need to know, for example, to be honest with them about, I value both of you. I get it, you don't get along. I can be a bridge, but I can only be a bridge if you both help me with this. But again, all of the principles I just described apply when you're in the middle. Do they truly believe you understand and care about what they're trying to do, their success, their felt vulnerabilities? And have you explained when you do things, why you're doing it the way you are, in a way that they can see that they should be able to trust you? The other thing is, if you're going to do something that is against their interest or doesn't reflect their priorities, I would go to them ahead of time and say, by the way, I'm going to have to do this. Let me explain why. But I know that this is not what you would want me to do. And I really hope that this won't undermine our relationship, rather than hiding it. I think being honest and transparent about those kinds of things, if that backfires, then it's probably hopeless anyway. But you want to do that and build it up so they know that they can really trust you. And also, if they're starting to share things or be too open with you in a way that it's not really in their best interest or appropriate, you want to stop them and say, look, don't go there, because you're going to put me in an awkward position and I'm not going to be able to be supportive of you. And whenever that happens, I'm going to tell you. You're not going to have to guess. So in other words, what you're doing is you're addressing the distrust issues. You're then addressing the trust issues in a live way that allows that to start to start building or just reinforces it being there. What you don't want is to build a generalized trust. That's too far. You can be all the way up on the trust continuum, but don't go over that hump into generalized trust. And for any of you who are there who are my students, you've probably heard me say that I will sometimes say something in class that is patently not true. And I will tell you afterwards, but in the meantime, the reason I do that is I want you to not just take everything as gospel, but think about it, reflect on it, and push back if it doesn't make sense to you. That's the kind of thing that helps build a trusting relationship. Terrific questions. I wish we could go on, but we're out of time. So let me just end by saying thank you for joining us. I'm inviting you to the next session with Professor Angelica Lee on October 2nd at 12:30. Her topic will be race in the workplace. And more generally, I would encourage you to follow us at Fuqua on LinkedIn so you can be alerted to that event and to other events going forward. Thanks again. I hope this was useful.